Deep breath. I was sitting in traffic recently just looking up at this massive new glass high-rise downtown. And it got me thinking, we spend so much of our time building these shiny monuments to our own egos, right?
Yeah, chasing a sort of fleeting validation.
Right. We want the corner office, the right car, the right image. It is all about status. We hold our smartphones, we swipe through our lives, and we just assume that human history is this clean, upward slope.
It is a very comforting illusion.
It really is. A perfectly straight line from primitive people banging rocks together all the way up to us, at the supposed pinnacle of human intelligence.
We naturally like to believe we are standing at the peak.
But what are we actually searching for? Because then you stand in front of the Great Pyramid of Giza, short pause, and suddenly that straight line of progress just shatter.
It does. It forces you to look in a mirror.
Yeah, and for this conversation, that is our mission. We are stepping away from the textbook narratives.
Yep.
I want us to look at this structure, not as a tomb, but as a massive, perfectly scaled mathematical model of the Earth, one that holds astronomical knowledge that supposedly did not exist when it was built.
Which completely upends everything we were taught. And to understand why this shifts our perspective so radically, we first have to grasp the sheer physical reality of the structure.
Right, the actual scale of it.
Yeah, we're talking about a monument that originally stood 481 feet high. It was built with a flawless 52-degree slope, containing over 2 million individual blocks of limestone and granite.
2 million. Just let that sink in.
And the base is massive. It is roughly 750 feet along each side, yet when you actually measure those sides, the lengths vary by only fractions of an inch.
And we really need to pause on that for a second, because the engineering implications there are just wild. If you are building a structure that massive and you get the base angles wrong by even a millimeter, right?
The errors compound.
Yeah, they magnify with every single layer. By the time you reach the top, the four corners won't meet in a point. The whole thing twists into a corkscrew.
Precisely. You cannot course correct halfway up. The bottom dictates the top. Every single stone has to be placed with an intention that anticipates the final peak hundreds of feet in the air.
It is about substance over just throwing something together.
Yes. But the precision of the physical dimensions is only the beginning of this. The monument is aligned to true astronomical north.
Not magnetic north, right, because magnetic north wanders around.
Correct. Magnetic north fluctuates constantly. The pyramid is aligned to true geographic north, and it achieves this alignment within 3/60ths of a single degree.
Let's unpack that for you listening, because 3/60ths of a degree sounds small, but it is hard to visualize. Degrees are divided into 60 minutes, meaning this is 3 minutes of arc.
It is an almost microscopic margin of error.
Right. To put that into perspective, imagine standing at one end of a football field. You try to draw a perfectly straight line to a target at the other end, and you miss the dead center by less than the width of a pencil.
It is staggering.
Now try doing that with a 6 million ton pile of rocks.
Which brings up a really crucial point about the human element here.
Like the labor force.
Yeah. We are taught in grade school that this was brute forced by oppressed laborers under the crack of a whip.
The Hollywood version.
Precisely. But when you look at the sheer intentionality of the architecture, you realize you cannot force an army of slaves to build a 6 million ton Swiss watch.
You can force someone to drag a heavy rock, sure.
But you cannot whip an exhausted workforce into engineering an astronomical instrument with 3 minutes of arc precision. It requires dedication. It requires a shared vision.
And history actually backs that up.
Right.
Slavery as we picture it was not present in the Old Kingdom.
No, it wasn't. This was a highly skilled labor force. But it goes deeper than just skill. The alignment to true north was a deliberate, painstakingly executed choice. It signals an engineering intent we are only just beginning to comprehend.
They went out of their way to achieve a level of exactness that is practically invisible to the naked eye.
It forces the question, why?
Right. If you aren't doing it just to make it look pretty, because you literally can't see the difference between perfect north and a tiny fraction off.
Yeah.
You're doing it because the math itself is the message.
The math is the language.
Slower and emphasized, which naturally leads us to where this monument was placed.
Location is the first major clue that the structure is meant to communicate something larger. The Great Pyramid sits almost perfectly on latitude 30.
Latitude 30.
Yeah, that is exactly 1/3 of the way between the equator and the North Pole.
A highly deliberate placement on the globe.
But the location is just the anchor. The real shock comes when you look at the scale embedded in the architecture. It incorporates the dimensions of our planet on a highly specific scale. That scale is 1 to 43,200.
1 to 43,200. Let's break down what that actually means in physical terms, because this is where the implications get really intense.
If you take the true original height of the Great Pyramid, which is 481 feet,
Right.
and you multiply it by 43,200, you get the polar radius of the Earth.
Deep breath. That is just a massive reality to confront.
It is the exact distance from the center of the Earth to the North Pole.
If that is true, it rewrites our entire understanding of ancient geography. I mean, it changes everything.
And the math continues. If you measure the base perimeter of the Great Pyramid, all four sides added together, and multiply that by the same factor of 43,200, you get the equatorial circumference of the Earth.
Okay, I need to push back here just on behalf of anyone listening who is naturally skeptical. Because if you are listening to this and thinking, well, this sounds like Texas sharpshooting, you aren't alone.
It is a fair critique.
Right. Numbers can be manipulated. We find patterns in everything. If I measure the dimensions of my house and multiply them by some random, highly specific decimal, couldn't I eventually find the distance to Jupiter?
You could, yeah.
So aren't we just working backward from the answer we want, picking a random multiplier to force a coincidence?
That is a very valid pushback. And it would be an airtight argument if the scale were 1 to 57,000 or 1 to 21,000.
If it were just a random string of digits?
Right. If it were pulled out of thin air to make the math work, we should pay no attention to it. But 43,200 is not random. It is a highly specific, deliberate number that belongs to a sequence found in ancient mythologies all over the world.
It proves the monument is literally a scale model of the planet.
Yes. And that the builders knew the exact circumference of the globe.
So why 43,200? What is the mechanism behind that specific number? Where does it come from?
To understand the origin of that number, we have to look away from the Earth and look up at the stars. It rests on an astronomical phenomenon called the precession of the equinoxes.
The cosmic wobble. It is a fascinating mechanism. To visualize this for you listening, imagine the Earth as a spinning top.
That is a good way to picture it.
When you spin a toy top on a table, it doesn't just rotate perfectly straight up and down. As it spins, the axis itself starts to sway in a slow, wide, lazy circle.
The Earth does that exact same thing in space.
Yes, the Earth has a slight tilt and it wobbles on its axis.
And because of that incredibly slow wobble, our perspective of the stars slowly changes over thousands of years.
It's like walking past an old street lamp that has been turned off for centuries and suddenly realizing it was never meant for light. It was a transmitter telling us about the sky.
That is a great metaphor. And this wobble affects two major things. First, the pole star. If you were standing on Earth 4,000 years ago and looked at the North Pole, the star above it was Thuban in the constellation of Draco.
And now it is Polaris.
Right. The wobble literally points the North Pole at entirely different stars over vast stretches of time.
It changes what is visible in our cosmic window.
Furthermore, it changes the background constellation that the sun rises against on the spring equinox. We slowly transition through the zodiac.
So the backdrop is moving.
Yes. For the last 2 millennia, the sun has risen in Pisces on the spring equinox. Soon, due to this wobble, it will transition into Aquarius.
And how long does that take?
To complete one full wobble, one great year, going through all 12 constellations and returning to the start takes just under 26,000 years. The convention applied in ancient astronomical mythology is 25,920 years.
And here is where the math ties everything together. How does a 25,920-year cycle connect back to our pyramid scale of 43,200?
They are part of the exact same mathematical family. They are all multiples of the number 72.
Okay, 72.
In the precession of the equinoxes, it takes 72 years for the Earth's axis to shift by 1 single degree.
Wow.
Multiply 72 by the 360 degrees of a circle, and you get the 25,920-year cycle. The number 43,200 is simply 600 times 72. It is deeply tied to this precessional math.
And this math shows up in other places, right? It isn't just an Egyptian thing.
No, not at all. For instance, look at the Rig Veda. This is an ancient Indian text, a collection of Vedic Sanskrit hymns.
Completely removed from Egypt.
Geographically and culturally entirely removed from Old Kingdom Egypt. Yet it is structured around 43,200 syllables. You find this sequence in ancient mythologies globally.
So if we follow the logic here, the pyramid is a cosmic clock. It is encoding the Earth's dimensions using a scale derived directly from the Earth's own astronomical wobble.
Which creates a massive historical paradox.
Right, because the Greek astronomer Hipparchus is widely credited with discovering the precession of the equinoxes roughly 2,000 years ago,
But the Great Pyramid was built 4,500 years ago.
as if trying to remember something, which means if the pyramid truly encodes this math, the knowledge of the Earth's dimensions and its celestial wobble is vastly older than the Greeks. It was already ancient when the pyramid was built. Let's follow that thread, because it raises a glaring question. Why does this feel this way? If the ancient Egyptians didn't discover this astronomical math themselves through centuries of telescope observations, they must have inherited it.
They had to have.
But if they had all this incredible blueprint knowledge to build Giza, why didn't human engineering just keep getting better and better from there? I mean, normally, technology improves over time. We went from the Wright brothers' first flight to landing on the moon in 66 years.
It is a rapid curve.
Why didn't the Egyptians build something even more mind-blowing 1,000 years later?
That is the grand paradox of Egyptology. You would naturally expect a continuous upward trajectory of skill. But after the Fourth Dynasty, the period when Giza was built, pyramid building essentially collapses.
It falls off a cliff.
Entirely. By the time you reach the Fifth and Sixth Dynasties, the structures are vastly inferior. Take the Pyramid of Unas in the Fifth Dynasty as a prime example.
What happens there?
If you go inside, it is magical. There are stunningly beautiful, star-covered ceilings and incredible hieroglyphs known as the pyramid texts carved into the tomb chamber.
But outside.
Outside, it is literally a crumbling pile of rubble. You can barely recognize it as a pyramid. They simply lost the ability to build the way they did at Giza.
So Giza was a one-off. It wasn't the beginning of a booming architectural revolution. It was the culmination of something older.
It was a message. A monument declaring, well, job done. It was built to stand on the plateau like an enormous, unshakable vault of knowledge meant to survive for millennia and force future generations to pay attention.
If the knowledge didn't originate with the Fourth Dynasty Egyptians, where did it come from? Who handed them the blueprints?
This points to the possibility of a forgotten episode in the human story, a civilization potentially dating back to the end of the last ice age.
The era of the cataclysms.
Yes. In ancient traditions all over the world, there are written accounts of survivors from a great cataclysm, sages. In Egypt, the texts refer to them as the followers of Horus. In ancient Sumer, they were known as the Upgalu.
Let's clarify that for the listener. These aren't described as gods throwing lightning bolts, right?
No, not deities in that sense.
They're described as sages who advised the early historical kings.
Yes. The mythological traditions speak of them as existing in a pre-Diluvian world, a world before a massive flood or global cataclysm.
The flood myths you hear everywhere.
Right. The texts describe them attempting to pass down advanced knowledge, acting as advisors to early human settlements, and preserving the remnants of a lost civilization. They embedded this inherited knowledge in myths and sacred numbers like 72 and 43,200, and ultimately, in stone.
Deep breath. We have spent all this time looking up at the stars, looking at the precision of the angles, the math, and the alignment to true north. But to truly understand Giza, we also have to look down.
We do.
Because the ancient Egyptians themselves didn't just see this as a big monument on the surface. They called the Giza Plateau Rostau.
Which translates to an entrance to the underworld.
Right. It is not just a surface monument. There is an entire physical world beneath it that mainstream archaeology has barely scratched.
The subterranean chamber is a perfect example of what is hiding down there.
Tell us about that.
It is carved roughly 100 feet vertically deep into the solid limestone bedrock, directly beneath the Great Pyramid. It is highly likely that the subterranean space was the original, much older, sacred site long before the 6-million-ton structure was placed on top of it.
I always think about the sheer claustrophobia of being down there, knowing you have 6 million tons of stone sitting directly over your head in an active earthquake zone.
It is unsettling.
And for the longest time, modern people didn't even know how to get inside the upper chambers of the pyramid. Think about the 9th century break-in by Khalifa al-Ma'mun. It's a wild story.
It is a fascinating moment in history. The pyramid was originally covered in perfectly smooth, white limestone casing stones. It reflected the sun brilliantly, but there was no visible entrance anywhere on the surface.
So in the year 820, al-Ma'mun and his men essentially just took primitive tools, fires, cold vinegar to crack the heated stone, and battering rams, and started smashing their way blindly into the northern face.
They tunneled in roughly 60 or 70 feet. And then, purely by chance, they heard the sound of something dropping in a hollow space nearby.
A total accident.
Completely. They dug blindly toward that sound and finally breached the original ascending and descending corridors.
And the crazy part is, we are still using that exact same crude robber's tunnel to enter the pyramid now. Which makes me wonder, what else is hiding down there?
We are missing a vast amount.
If we only found those main corridors because a rock happened to fall while guys with battering rams were nearby, what are we missing entirely? Our whole modern society feels like an unfinished task. We build things to be replaced, but they built this to hide things securely.
And modern ground-penetrating radar, which pulses radar waves into the Earth to detect variations in density and hidden voids, has picked up enormous anomalies.
What kind of anomalies?
Under the second pyramid, the one attributed to Khafre, independent radar scans have detected structural shapes hundreds of feet deep. Shapes that appear to involve spiral stairways and massive chambers.
Spiral stairways, hundreds of feet below the bedrock.
That is what the data suggests. But the reaction from mainstream archaeology has been incredibly dismissive.
Why is that? I mean, if the radar says there is a void, shouldn't the scientific method demand we drill a small hole and run a camera down there?
You would think so, but it is a protective mechanism. The current model of human history is very rigid. When you point out anomalies or theories like the Orion correlation, which suggests the three main pyramids mimic the belt stars of the Orion constellation, it is met with fierce hostility because it threatens the established timeline.
It threatens their status.
Exactly. I mean, definitively, it threatens the authority of the current historical narrative. But we know for a fact that extensive underground complexes exist elsewhere in the ancient world. Look at Turkey.
Derinkuyu.
Yes, entire subterranean worlds. Derinkuyu is an ancient multi-level underground city in Turkey that descends hundreds of feet into the earth and was capable of sheltering up to 20,000 people.
That is massive.
If we run ground-penetrating radar on the known underground cities in Turkey, and the technology accurately maps what we know is there, we should trust the readings we are getting at Giza. The ancient Egyptians explicitly viewed Rostau as a gateway. It makes perfect logical sense that a massive underworld complex awaits discovery there.
Short pause. So, what does this all mean for us? When you pull all these threads together, you are left with a picture that completely challenges the linear timeline we are taught in school.
It shatters it.
The Great Pyramid of Giza is undeniably not just a pile of stone serving as a tomb. It is a mathematical model of the Earth. It is a cosmic clock, meticulously tracking the slow, precessional wobble of our planet.
It was deliberately built to survive millennia.
To force future generations, to force us to ask profound questions about the true timeline of human intelligence.
It acts as a mirror, a monument that asks us to recognize the possibility that we are a species with amnesia, that the ancients possessed an understanding of the cosmos, mathematics, and our place in the universe, that we are only now slowly beginning to recover.
We sit there, holding a paper cup of coffee, staring at a screen, convinced we are the gods of this era.
While ignoring the stones right beneath our feet.
It leaves you with a profound thought to chew on. If a lost civilization managed to encode the precise dimensions of our planet and the exact wobble of the stars into a 6 million-ton stone monument 4,500 years ago, just to ensure the knowledge survived a catastrophe.
What would we do?
Right, what would we do? If our modern society collapsed tomorrow, what physical structure do we have that would survive 4,500 years and successfully communicate our understanding of the universe?
Very little.
Would our glass skyscrapers last? Would our digital servers mean anything to the people who find them? Or would we, too, fade into a myth, waiting for someone in the distant future to finally decode the pieces we left behind?
Peaceful silence. It puts our obsession with status into perspective.
Near a whisper. Very intimate. It really does. If these thoughts found a place in the corners of your mind and you wish to share these observations, you are welcome to join us.